Who should the Leafs be targeting in free agency? On today's show, we give you our top 5 Leafs UFA targets and who are some bargain bin options for the Buds. All that and more coming up on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. A little bonus podcast for y'all today because we realized that we didn't really get to dive into the free agent class a whole lot since we were so dedicated to our draft coverage the last few days that we felt, we got to put a little extra pod out before, free agency kicks off and talk about some of the players that we would like Brad Treliving and the Maple Leafs to target in the upcoming days. So, Dave, why don't we kind of get right to it? So the Leafs, they're projected to have $11.9 million in cap space with the use of Jake Muzzin's LTIR money. It does not appear that they're going to buy out Matt Murray, so more money will not become available there. It could happen tomorrow, or it could happen later on in the offseason. We talked about that on yesterday's show in depth if you want to go and listen to that podcast. But in total, looks like they'll have about $11.9 million to work with at this point. And, the 9 UFAs that they currently have under contract doesn't appear that they will be able to come up with extensions for them by noon tomorrow. I know there's some word that they're still in negotiations with guys like Kerfoot, Shen, and Ryan O'Reilly. We'll see if something comes to fruition between now and noon tomorrow. But if not, those guys will hit the open market. Ilya Samsonov is a restricted free agent who I believe they'll be tendering if they haven't tendered already, actually. So that contract negotiation will still take place, obviously. But outside of that, there's a bunch of other guys that the Maple Leafs should have their eyes on to try and get into Toronto to try and help reshape this team. Before we go through the players and the names, is there, was there specific positions that you were kind of targeting or style of players that you think the Maple Leafs will be targeting this offseason?
Well, 2 for me is the right side of the defense. They don't have many options on that right side there. Especially if they don't get Luke Shen back, if Justin Hall leaves, that's two already gone that played a lot for you during the season, and also just trying to find some depth on left wing. Their left wing, they have a lot of good options on the right. Left, not so much. It always seems to be a position of need, especially, obviously Matthew Nyes helps a little bit there, but I mean, you can't expect Matthew Nyes take all the, to be the only, upgrade you could potentially have on the left side going into next season.
Yeah, I think those are 2 areas that I also kind of was targeting when I was looking at the UFA list and trying to decide who would be good fits in Toronto. So why don't we kick this thing off, buddy? Let's go through, a few of our top UFA targets that we believe the Maple Leafs should go after. We both have a top 5 power ranking list. Why don't you give me, we'll start from 5 to 1. We'll kind of alternate our picks and our players. So why don't you start off with your number 5 pick for top 5 Leafs UFA targets?
At number 5, I'm going to go with Miles Wood from the New Jersey Devils. We know that he is not expected to be back going into next season. If you're looking for a guy with some size, he only does bring some of that size. 6'2", 195 pounds. He had 13 goals last year, 27 points. He's coming off a 1-year deal that paid him $3.2 million. I don't think he's going to get that, considering his production. So I feel like that's someone the Leafs could potentially get at a reasonable deal, and he plays on left wing as well. I feel like there's still something left in the tank. He's only 27 years old, so he's not over the hill yet. I think it would be a 1-year deal. For him, he could try to get himself back into back on track and look to make some money. I know he had an off year. Offensively good, defensively there are some issues there, so I don't think you can expect him to play a high role, but I still think a pretty good, interesting depth option there.
Yeah, Miles Wood's definitely a good player, somebody who I think that the Maple Leafs have targeted for quite some time, although that was the Kyle Dubas Maple Leafs. But, I would imagine that there's a lot of the same, pro scouts that are still in that building in Toronto, and he's certainly someone who they're circling, I think, and targeting as a potential fit for this team. Kind of plays a power forward style game, 6'2", $195, has 148 points through his 400 career games. And like you said, a little bit of a down year offensively, just 13 goals, but he scored 17 goals in the 55 game season back in the lockout year, and had 19 goals as a career high back in 2018, where he also had 32 points. So he's got a little bit of offense to him, but we'll see if the Maple Leafs circle Miles Wood. I think that he'd be a decent depth option for this Maple Leafs team. All right, a player that I have at number 5 is also a forward, but it's actually going to be a former Maple Leaf coming home. How about Connor Brown, Dave? Let's bring Connor Brown back into the fold here, man. Like, this guy's an unrestricted free agent. Connor Brown, unfortunately, got hurt last year, so he is somebody who also is coming off of a down year, I suppose you could say. In that regard, but he's a hometown kid, Toronto Maple Leafs draft pick and born and bred, but he only played 4 games last year. But we know what he can do. We know what he did for the Ottawa Senators, and we know what he did for the Toronto Maple Leafs once upon a time. I understand that he's a right winger, but I still think that he's a quality player. He could be kind of a middle six guy, third line guy who can kill penalties, chip in offensively a little bit here and there. I think that Connor Brown would be a nice pickup to bring back home to the Toronto Maple Leafs.
He was actually number 4 on my list. I think, I know some people who know Connor Brown. He never wanted to leave Toronto. Obviously, he got traded out of Toronto as part of the, moving the Nikita Zaitsev deal to Ottawa. And the only competition Leafs are probably going to have here are the Edmonton Oilers. And, we know that Connor McDavid is a big draw for Connor Brown, reunite someone they used to play with back in juniors. But what better way to compete with the Oilers than to say, let's bring you back home. And I know he loves being home, so that would be a nice little reunion if they could make that happen.
Yeah, we'll see. You're right, but I think that would be a great pickup for the Maple Leafs, who I had at number 4. I went to the blue line, and I've got a guy by the name of Scott Mayfield as my number 4 option. Right shot blue liner. He's one of those bigger body defensemen. He's played on the island for his entire career, so it's the first time that he's testing free agency, and maybe they can lure him into Toronto. But at 6'5", 220 pounds, is a big boy, and he actually had his best offensive season this past year, 6 goals, 24 points in 82 games. He's not known for his offensive capabilities, but I think it is noteworthy that, just because he's 30 years old, his offense is still somewhat there. But he's known as a shutdown defensive defenseman, top 4 defenseman. He could be this team's number 4. He could kind of be, part of a shutdown role with TJ Brody if need be, if Brody's still kicking around here. I think that Scott Mayfield would be a real solid option. He shuts down plays. And like I said, big body. And I know that's something that the Maple Leafs are targeting this offseason, is trying to get bigger, and that includes both up front and on the blue line. And I think Scott Mayfield, 6'5", 220, definitely checks those boxes.
Yeah, I definitely do. The Leafs are definitely trying to find some value too in free agency, not necessarily going after the big fish like a Dmitry Orlov. I think that's going to be a way too expensive contract and player there for the Leafs. So I think, Scott Mayfield would be a decent option. I know that maybe Lou Lamoriello will try to take one more swing to bring him back after they got rid of the Josh Bailey contract. But I mean, Scott Mayfield has always been a name that's kind of been out there that I've liked for sure.
Absolutely. Number 3 on your list, Dave.
It's a defenseman too. That's Carson Soucy. If you're looking for a big defenseman who can play both left and right side, Carson Soucy is definitely that. He is a left shot. 6'5", 210 pounds. If you want size, this is someone that would do that. You know, he's come from Seattle. He's been a relatively decent option there in Seattle. You know, he's not the biggest offensive weapon, although he did score 10 goals in his first season in Seattle. And, you know, Seattle's big on the analytics, so you know that he would kind of fit what the Leafs are trying to do there. I'm sure that's someone the Leafs could see as a potential bargain option. He's coming off of his last deal was 2.75 for 3 years. So could he be the a better alternative to Luke Shen? That would probably be probably where the Leafs could look to. He's 28, or I think he's going to be turning 29 in July. So he'll be 29 going into next year. So definitely someone I would like to see the Leafs go after there.
Yeah, I also had Carson Soucy as my number 3 player, so we're on the same page on that one.
We're in sync.
We're in sync, buddy. We're in sync, and I don't know if he will be a bargain player. I think there's going to be a bidding war for Carson Soucy. Like, you know, obviously we saw what the Vegas Golden Knights just did, and what they were able to do with size on the blue line and guys who can skate. That's exactly what Carson Soucy is. He's a 6'5", 210-pound defender, but a really good skater. He can defend. He can provide a little bit of offense. His transition game is solid. And as you mentioned, he's really had some really good numbers analytically. You know, the underlying numbers have always looked good for Carson Soucy as well, even when he was in Minnesota. So, you know, he's a player who certainly I think is going to garner a lot of attention. I don't know if he's going to be a bargain or what it would cost to bring him in. I would imagine he would be in and around the 4 million range, maybe just below that on a multi-year deal, maybe just above it. But I think in that realm between maybe 3.5 and 4.5 million bucks, somewhere on, you know, a 3 to 5 year deal. And are the Leafs willing to go there? I'm not entirely sure, but I do think that he would be a good addition to this team as a depth option for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So certainly Carson Soucy, if you're looking to add a little bit of size on the back end, someone who could skate and move the puck, he's a player to target, I think, for Toronto. All right, number 2, Dave. Are we in sync again?
I don't know. This is going to be a little bit of a swing of the fence for me here.
Okay, go ahead.
This is all dependent on if he's going to play next year. My name here is Jonathan Toews.
Okay, go on, King.
Look, bringing David Kampf was a good move by the Leafs. I just don't know if I want to see David Kampf as a third line center. I think I would like to see someone who has a little more offense to provide. And you know, I prefer Kampf in the 4C because if you can get that 1 to 4 solidified, I think Ryan O'Reilly is going to be too expensive for the Leafs. I think he's going to probably going to price himself out of Toronto. I think Jonathan Toews, you know, I still think he wants to play because I know he'll take some time to evaluate his health. The good thing here is if you go and get Jonathan Toews, you know what you're getting. He'd be a good option down the middle, can play different roles. He's shown that he can still produce offensively. And yeah, he has the injury question mark to him, but this is why then you have that David Kampf option. If he gets hurt, you have Kampf that you can slide up. That's why I like bringing David Kampf back because he can be a plug and play third line center if need be. As an everyday third line center, I don't know if I can trust that. Maybe he has more offense to give if he's given those minutes, but I don't know. I like the pedigree of Jonathan Toews. I think he needed to move on from the Blackhawks. That's a team that's just looking to go in a new direction, and he's still, I think, looking to join a contender. So why not the Leafs?
What do you think that would cost? What do you think he's looking for in a deal? Like we just saw Corey Perry sign for $4 million. I know that was in Chicago, and I don't know what the heck, like why they did that. Like he's been playing for basically league min the last like 3 years, or $1 million or less for the last 3-4 years. Why they felt like, okay, let's give this guy $4 million to come to Chicago and be, put Bedsy under his wing. I don't know. Like I don't think Taves would cost $4 million, but
No.
what do you think it would cost for him to come to Toronto? What does that contract look like?
I think maybe $3 million, because he's Patrice Bergeron going back to Boston. I think he did $2.5 million with performance bonuses. So if you're the Leafs, you can try to say we'll throw in some performance bonuses if need be. If
I
that
don't know if
means
you want that, though. I don't know if you want that. You don't want to have cap overages going into the year where Matthews and Nylander have their contracts kicking in.
That's true.
If they have the
Well,
contracts
that's
kicking in.
if they have their contracts kicking. That's the other thing. I think $3 million would be a fair deal for Taves. I don't see, again, like he probably might get a better offer on the market, but it all depends on what's the situation he's looking for.
Yeah. 2-3 million, I think maybe. Like if he's cup chasing, I don't know if he's really going to be looking for money. The guy just made what, 80 million, more than that on his
Yeah,
last deal.
exactly.
Maybe if he's cup chasing, he understands like I'm going to do the Corey Perry route where I'm taking league men just to go places, or what Joe Thornton did at the end of his career. I like money's not really a problem for
No.
this guy at this point. Maybe he does go and take some cheap deals just to try and win himself another Stanley Cup. And playing in Toronto, the mecca of hockey, as a Canadian at one point, known as Captain Serious. He was one of the best players in the NHL at one point. Not no longer what he used to be, obviously. But if he could find his way here in Toronto, and be this team's third, fourth line center, boy, is that ever one hell of a depth signing for the Maple Leafs. But again, if you're signing a guy to be a fourth line center, a third line center, it's got to be for $3 million or less, you would think.
Yeah.
In that range, right? So yeah, I'll be curious to see what happens with old Jonathan Toews. Still a good player, I think, when healthy. That is the key word there, when healthy. But I think he could still contribute, obviously, and add a winning pedigree to this roster and this lineup too. Okay, I like that. I like that selection of Jonathan Toews. He was one of my kind of dark horse options that I was going to talk about later. So I'm glad you brought him up. For myself, I got Tyler Bertuzzi as my number 2 draft target. I still think that the Maple Leafs could use a little bit of pizzazz up in their top 6. Their left side still to this day is not very strong. Like it still has a little bit left to be desired, I would say, down on the left side. So if you could add in Tyler Bertuzzi, who's just a good hard-nosed forward who can put up some offense, score some goals, I think that he would be someone who the Maple Leafs could target as a top line guy potentially, or a second line winger for this Maple Leafs team. So he'd be someone who I'd be targeting. And I know he's coming off of what you would call, I guess, a down year this past season. What did he play? 50 games, I think he had, and only had 8 goals. But the year prior, 30-goal season for the Detroit Red Wings in 68 games, had 62 points in 68 games. So, the offense is there if he's in the right situation. So I think you come to Toronto, plug him in your top 6. You should hope that he can, score you 25 or so goals, and 6 foot, 200-pound player who plays kind of a rugged style of hockey. That the Maple Leafs are looking for that. They need that. And if he could score as well, that's obviously an added bonus. So Tyler Bertuzzi might be expensive. I think it will be expensive, but if they have, upwards of 11 million to spend on guys, I think quality over quantity should be used. Should be the way that they use up that cap space. And Tyler Bertuzzi certainly would be a quality add, in my opinion.
Yeah, he was my number 1 target. And you talk about he had 8 goals during the regular season. He had 5 goals, 10 points in the Bruins first round series against the Panthers. That's pretty good for production for a guy who was a trade deadline target. You know, they had to fit him into that system there, and you know, I just like he's gonna give you that, you know, piss and vinegar, as you like to say, and yeah, he's good for 20 goals. There's no reason why he can't come on this Leafs team and score at least 20. I think he's got the potential to do a lot more, especially if he's on a team like the Leafs and Detroit.
Well,
You know,
he was in at least 20. He was a 20 goal scorer when he was in Detroit. He had no help when he was in Detroit at that
yeah,
point. You put him on a line with, you know, Nylander or Tavares and Matthews, Marner. That guy's going to pick up more than 20 goals. He'll pick up points in his sleep with those guys.
yeah, I think he's probably gonna be one of the more sought after free agent targets as well. Like if Barbashev didn't re-sign with Vegas, he was gonna be my number one. But
Yeah.
obviously with him coming back, like Bertuzzi, I think Barbashev signing now makes Bertuzzi the number one guy. And maybe the Barbashev contract kind of helps teams. Now I think Bertuzzi has a little more leverage now where he can ask for. I mean, he's just made 4.75. That number is definitely gonna start over 5. I would say for Bertuzzi.
I would
Uh,
think so.
it's gonna be
Or
the turn right.
maybe 5, like 5 by
Yeah,
5, I could see being, you
yeah,
know, a possibility for Tyler Bertuzzi. Like, he's 28 years old. You sign him 5 years, that takes him until he's what, 33 would be the math
yeah.
on that one. So that's probably what you're looking at, I would think, for to bring in a Tyler Bertuzzi into the fold. So yeah, we'll see. I think he's a good player and certainly fits a lot of needs and checks a lot of boxes in what the Maple Leafs should be looking for in this free agency period. My number one, though, I did have Dmitry Orlov if they can make it happen. I don't know if it happens, obviously. You know, he's a player that will be highly coveted. He's the best defenseman that's out on the market at this point. You know, and I think that he's, you know, a good stature, 6 foot, 215 pounds. You know, what he was able to do when he got to Boston was great. You know, 17 points in 23 games once he got to Boston in the regular season. Ended up with 8 points through 7 playoff games as well. So super productive offensively. And, you know, obviously his defensive game is pretty stout as well. Plays a solid defensive game too. So I know that he's a left shot defenseman and they have a lot of those guys. But if you can bring in a Dmitry Orlov, a guy who you can chuck into your top 4, maybe you have Orlov and TJ Brody as kind of your shutdown pairing. I think that you're in good shape. You know, they're looking to add those types of players, some impact guys to their roster and to the lineup, and work on that blue line. I think if you could add a Dmitry Orlov, I don't know if they can or if they will. He might get priced out. Someone else will throw a whole bunch of money at him, just being that he is the best defenseman. And we're seeing what defensemen are signing for and going for in the trade market these days. But if for whatever reason the Maple Leafs prioritize this guy, he would be a great fit for this Leafs blue line.
Yeah, I think so. I would like to have Orlov because you hear about, you know, the Leafs had looked into Erik Karlsson. It's like, why would you go after Erik Karlsson when you could potentially get Orlov? You know, maybe at a better deal, cheaper deal, probably a better defenseman too. You know,
Like, I don't see Orlov. Orlov probably signs in, like, I think it starts with a 5. I don't think it goes. Maybe you could get creep into the early, you know, low 6s. But when you're talking Erik Karlsson, even with retention, you're still gonna have to pay 7-8 million bucks.
Yeah, I think that number is probably going to be in the 8. So he's just coming off 5.1 with Washington. So I think that number is going to be 5.5 to 6.
Yeah, I could see it go, you know, 5.5 to 6, 6.25 maybe in that realm, depending on how much term you get for Dmitry Orlov, because I believe he's in his 30s. Yeah, 31. He'll be 32 in July. So, you know, do you want to sign him for you know, a long-term contract? That is a concern at 32 years old. Do you want to bring him to his 37 year season with the 5-year deal to try and buy down the cap hit. That's always something to keep in mind when you have a player that is into his 30s. But the Maple Leafs, they're in win now mode. I mean, they could deal with that contract and his decline 3 years from now. But if they want to try and win now and reshape that blue line, I think he'd be a pretty good option to try and make that happen. So there's our top 5 free agent targets from both of us. From David, I had Connor Brown, Scott Mayfield, Carson Soucy, Tyler Bertuzzi, and Dmitry Orlov. Dave, your list was?
So my list was Miles Wood, Connor Brown, Jonathan
Soucy.
Taves. Oh, Carson Soucy. Yeah, Carson Soucy, Jonathan Taves, and then who was my number one? Tyler Bertuzzi. My God, the brain is not working well. The memory's not
working. You didn't
working.
write this stuff down or what?
I did write it down, but I changed the page.
All good, buddy. All good. Any bargain bin or any honorable mentions that you wanted to also discuss quickly before we get out of here for guys who you think maybe the Leafs could target that just missed out on your top 5?
Yeah, Jesper Fast was one. I think he's I don't know. I don't think Carolina. I mean, I wouldn't surprise me if Carolina tries to bring him back, but if not, he's got that speed. He can play the penalty kill. He'd be a guy that I think the Leafs could look to entertain if they want to add that speed element. Other than him, it's tough because I don't know how many bargain guys are going to be out there, because there's guys who are pretty good that are going to command pretty. There's. I'm trying to think of who else. I'm just looking quickly at my other list here. Like Nick Bjugstad, I don't know how much he would command on a new deal. Like, he's someone that if you're looking for a little more depth and size down the middle, or even on the.
Literally just got a notification from Elliot Friedman hearing Jesper Fast will return to the Carolina Hurricanes. Good player, good fit there. So there goes Jesper Fast.
Well, I see. I had the right idea there, I guess. So that takes that one off. Like, I think there's going to be some of those guys that they're going to be looking for just a what's the word I'm looking for? Refresh their value going into next year.
Garnet Hathaway is kind of one of those guys that I don't think will sign for a lot, but could have some suitors if they're looking to add some meat and potatoes to the bottom 6, which is what we've heard they're willing to do. Ryan Reeves, his name along with Austin Watson has been brought up as someone that Brad Treliving is expected to target come the opening of free agency. Whatever we think about it, it is what it is, but I would prefer a guy like Garnet Hathaway, who also big, strong guy who can be a bit of a sheriff out there and control things, but he also can play. He's got some jam to him as well, and he can actually get up and down the ice pretty easily and stay with some guys. Here's another name that I actually really like, and he's a player who I've when I've put together some trade packages in the past to try and do some trades, whatever, at deadline or free agency or in the off season, whatever it may be. A young player who I've always tried to pluck out of Anaheim. It sounds as though they're not going to tender Max Comtois.
No,
he's the type of bargain bin player, redemption story, young player who needs a new change of scenery that I think I would love to put here in Toronto. He's kind of like, Nick Ritchie in a way, where it was, Nick Ritchie's time in Anaheim came to an end and they just decided not to tender his RFA status, and he became a restricted free agent at a pretty young age. Max Comtois is going to be the exact same situation for him. He's only 24 years old, and he won't be 25 until January, but 6'2", 210 pounds, former second round pick, 50th overall by the Anaheim Ducks. He's somebody who at 21 years old, he had 16 goals, 33 points in 55 games for the Anaheim Ducks in the COVID season there, that 56 game year. So that was kind of his stepping stone to won't call it a breakout, but the first time where you looked and said, ooh, maybe Comtois is going to become a player. but he's followed that up with 16 and 19-point seasons, hasn't eclipsed the double-digit goal mark since. But there is a player in there, in junior, he had 44 goals in 54 games in his final season in junior, or I guess his draft year in junior, that is. So I think that there is certainly a good hockey player that's still in there. Um, he's young enough and I think skilled enough, and he's got jam where if the Maple Leafs can bring him in and as a bottom six player, I think that would be a solid bargain bin option when he becomes available, because it sounds as though they're not going to tender him and he'll become an unrestricted free agent.
Yeah, he was someone I had him as an I just found him on my list. I think his qualifying offer was over around $2.5 million, which that's a little too much for Max Comtois. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if either he goes back to Anaheim on a lower number, or he says, you know what, I'm going to go see if another team is going to give me better value or even just a better opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like that as well. Lars Eller is a guy who was on my list, although I don't know if you bring in Lars Eller, he can do similar things to what David Kampf can do for you. So I'm not sure if you want both of those guys on your list, but he's more of a prototypical third line center than David Kampf would be, I suppose. Evan Rodriguez has been a name that has been associated with Toronto for a few years now. They traded for him once upon a time, and he elected to not sign with them in free agency and leave anyways. Tyler Mott, someone who I've always been a big fan of, Energizer Bunny type player. Loves to eat pucks for a living. Guy kills penalties and puts his body on the line. Brian Dumoulin on the back end, maybe a Radko Gudas who's a free agent. Would you hate it if the Maple Leafs brought in Radko Gudas, given what he did to poor Joe Wall after the elimination in Game 5? Do you think they would go that route, Dave?
I mean, yeah, that'd be hilarious as hell. But I just think Radko Gudas will be spending more time in the penalty box than actually doing a lot of positive things for the Leafs. Considering if you,
yeah,
look, I can if the deal makes sense, you have to consider all your options, and he was effective. Let's say effective for the Panthers, but he was also a liability at times for the Panthers too, and they found a way to win. I mean, they found a way to win in spite of it. But yeah, I just think you look at him and what he would do in Toronto. I don't think that stuff would fly when you have when you play for Toronto, especially in the playoffs.
One more bargain bin that I'm just seeing here who I think would be a good option. Pia Suter, I think, could be a good option for the Maple Leafs as a bargain bin guy. Had 24 points this year, but a couple years ago, his first season in the NHL, put up a pretty good rookie campaign. So I think he's someone who might be able to, come in at a relatively low cap number as a third line guy, who has a little bit of upside to move up and down your lineup. That's probably about where I'm at. An interesting player. Do you think they sniff around like Patrick Kane? Like, do they even sniff around that, you think, or is that not going to be an option for the Maple Leafs? And keep in mind, Patrick Kane won't. He underwent surgery, so he won't be playing until like midseason, anyways. So he probably is in a situation where he doesn't sign July 1st and probably pulls a Solani where he just kind of waits and then signs somewhere, I would think, come around Christmas time when he's ready to get ramped up and pick a team that he thinks is, looking like a juggernaut Stanley Cup champion. But do you think the Maple Leafs might be a team that could be interested in a Patty Kane, or do you think they don't even kind of go down that avenue?
I wouldn't surprise me if they consider it, but yeah, like you're not even going to be able to pay him a lot, right? Like especially with the injury concerns, but he did. I don't know. I don't think he played great in New York, but he wasn't terrible. Like he was just okay for them. So like you have to wonder how much is left in the tank for Patrick Kane. Especially he's a pure offensive player, so you have to hope that he is able to produce. And yeah, you go for the playoff production. You maybe hope that if he's healthy, that gets him back on track. That's my only concern. Can the time off be exactly what he needs to get himself back to being that really good offensive producer? That's just a huge question mark that you're gonna have to take a gamble on.
Yep, absolutely. So we will see which of these guys the Maple Leafs do decide to go after, and we'll see. What players end up becoming new Maple Leafs. We'll see. 24 hours or less than 24 hours by this point that you're listening until the free agent frenzy kicks off, and it's always a fun time. I know that I'll be sitting right there in the cabana watching it. It's also Canada Day, so shout out to everyone who's going to be celebrating and enjoying their Canada Day. I'm glad that the free agent frenzy for the first time in 3 years is on Canada Day. Last year was like mid-July, and the year before it was in like October. It's finally back, and we can celebrate, rightfully so, on Canada Day, drinking our brewskis and watching the free agent frenzy. So I'm excited for it. Hopefully, some of these guys that we are targeting end up signing with the Maple Leafs, because I think that would put a smile on both of our faces. And just a reminder too, because yesterday when Brad Treliving was speaking after the draft, he did say that he expects that this free agent frenzy to be, I guess, less of a frenzy, a little bit longer potentially. There's still going to be a whole whack of signings that'll be announced by noon. But because the time crunch and the fact that draft one day off and then free agency, there may not be as many signings on July 1, and it could leak into next week and into early July more than typical. But still should be a fun one for sure. All right, good stuff, Dave. Lots of fun. That was our Leafs free agent frenzy preview. We'll be back on Monday to kind of recap what happens over the weekend. Who signs where? Who do the Maple Leafs get? And who's still out on the market? Because I'm sure there still will be a bunch of really good players on Monday when we reconvene. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank everyone for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasts and platforms, including up on YouTube, and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. Follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. If you're watching on YouTube, smash that like button. Leave a comment down below who you want to see the Maple Leafs target in free agency. And we'll be back with another episode for you guys on Monday to recap what happens over the weekend. Again, enjoy your Canada Day, folks. For all y'all Canadians listening along to the show, for you Americans, we'll wish you a happy 4th of July next week. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.